Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, westerns. I'm going to be talking about Shane by Jack Shaefer and True Grit by Charles Portis. So I read these two books as part of June on the Range, the Western-themed reading event running throughout June and created by Michael K. Vaughan. So I hadn't read a huge number of Westerns before going into June on the Range, but I'm really, really enjoying them. And these two books were no exception to that. They were both absolutely fantastic. I'll talk a little bit about what each of the books is about and the kind of backgrounds to the books. And then I want to talk about a similar theme that I think was running through both of the books that I thought was really interesting. Shane was written by Jack Shaefer and was originally published in 1949. And it's about a family who live, in a fairly, they live kind of, they've got like a ranch on the outskirts of a town. There's mum, dad, and the young boy, who I think is supposed to be about kind of 10 or 11, who's called Bob. And there is a unscrupulous kind of cattle baron in the area who's trying to get everyone's land, and wants their land in particular. And it's about that kind of background is painted at the start of the book. And the father of the family is very much aware of this and wants to try and stand up to this cattle baron. So then enter into the story Shane, who is a kind of a bit of a loner and a gunslinger basically, who's travelling around and has also got a bit, has clearly got a bit of a checkered past that he's ashamed of. He ends up staying with the family. He needs somewhere to stay, he needs some work, so the father takes him on as kind of like a farmhand. And he stays with the family, and as the plot progresses and the threat against the farm and their livelihood from this cattle baron increases, it becomes more and more apparent that Shane is going to get involved, and there's going to be some shooting. And that indeed is what happens. I don't think I'd be spoiling the book for anyone by saying that. So you've got this wonderful kind of steady, slow build-up of tension as the book progresses, until Shane, who is all the way through the book trying to contain the violence within him, eventually it erupts. But you've got it's what's really nice about the book is it's written from the perspective of Bob, the son. And a lot of it is about him comparing his father and Shane. And he deeply, deeply admires both of them. But they are two quite different men. The father is very much a father figure. So he's, devoted to his family. He, constantly wants to do the right thing, but equally doesn't want to back down, in the face of this aggression from the baddie. Whereas Shane, he's not, he's not portrayed as a good guy. There's definitely some bad stuff in his past, but he's trying to be a good guy. And whereas for the father, it comes naturally. For Shane, it doesn't. So there's a very interesting relationship between the two, and equally with the mother. She is devoted to her husband, but at the same time clearly has a bit of an attraction to Shane, and he to her as well. So that's like another dimension to the story that's played out quite interestingly. But you see it all from the perspective of the son. So it's very cleverly done, and a very enjoyable and exciting book. So True Grit then was written in '68, so not right at the end of the kind of era of westerns, but certainly as westerns were starting to peter out a little bit. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of the way it's told. So the main thing is that it's written from the protagonist, from the point of view of the protagonist, who is a young person. So in this story, the protagonist is a young girl, teenage girl called Mattie Ross. She is remembering the events that happened as like an elderly spinster. She's remembering the events that happened to her as a young girl. And the story here is that her father has been killed by a kind of a guy who was a bit of a loner, who the father took on as a hired hand. Who then got involved in gambling and things like that, and when the father tried to stop him, got shot for his efforts. So this hired hand has then, after shooting the father, has gone on the run, Mattie, the girl, travels to the town where the father was killed, leaving her mother and younger brother, I think it is, behind to kind of look after the farm. And she is determined to bring this killer to justice. So she hires a guy called Rooster Cogburn, who's I think he's like an ex-marshal, and a rough, tough gunslinger guy, to help her hunt down this guy and bring him to justice. And they also team up with another guy called LeBeef, who is also pursuing the same killer but for a different murder that he's carried out. So you get the three of them kind of travelling together cross country, trying to track down this guy and either arrest or kill him. One interesting similarity that I didn't realise between the two books until I looked them up is that they were both originally published as serials. So Shane was originally published in a magazine called Argosy, which is kind of a fairly well-known, kind of men's adventure magazine. And True Grit was originally serialised in a newspaper, which I think from memory was called the Saturday Evening Post. So interesting that both of them were published as serials originally, which obviously were, much loved and successful, and then got turned into books. And it seems to me that they both of them, because of the nature of their story, they're both quite simple stories. I think they would both suit that kind of serialisation quite well. And similarly, again to Shane, True Grit, you get a lot more emotion and feeling and things like that in the book because of the fact that it's told from the perspective of a child, effectively. So you get Mattie Ross's perspective on the world, and she is just a wonderful character. So the boy in Shane, I would say, is kind of a bit bland. He's that kind of gee whiz mister type of kid that you see in American sitcoms in the 50s. Whereas Mattie Ross is fantastic. She's so incredibly determined. There's a fantastic scene near the beginning where she's gone into like a saloon or something like that, and she's talking to somebody about people she could hire to track down the killer, and they go, well, there's this guy who's really, really loyal and always sticks to the law, always gets his man and brings him in so he can stand trial. And there's this guy, who's truly honourable and stuff like that. Or there's Rooster Cogburn, who's a complete bastard and really ruthless. And she goes, right, where can I find this Rooster Cogburn then? So she's just brilliant. She's so determined and fantastic. And the climax, and I won't give away what happens at the end, but the climax of the book, which involves her heavily. So whereas Bob in Shane is kind of an incidental character in that he is, he's very much the observer of what's going on in the adult world. Mattie Ross is much more integral to the story in True Grit. And it's absolutely fantastic. Her involvement in it was really enjoyable. So the thing that struck me then as really interesting about these two books is, I guess it's two things really. It seems to me that with both of them, you've got these, that the gunslinger characters, the kind of men of action type characters, are very much outsiders. So Shane, is somebody who turns up at the farm and gets taken on by the father. But he is a loner, he's an outsider, he's clearly got a checkered past. And similarly in True Grit, Rooster Cogburn is this character who just kind of, travels around, sleeping rough. He very much lives outside of normal society. And similarly, unlike a lot of westerns, which are, quite wild, if you like, both of these have a quite civilised town at the heart of, a real sense of civilization and society at the heart of them. So in Shane, you've got this town that the farm is on the outskirts of, and that town plays a big part in the story. In True Grit, you don't see it quite so much, but you've got this sense of the family farm that Mattie Ross has travelled from, and the fact that that the normality of their lives, which were quite ordinary farming lives, has been disrupted by the killing of the father. So you've got this sense of a normal day-to-day life that's been disrupted in both of the books. So in both books there is an aggressor who disrupts family life and in both books there is an outsider who is someone who kind of lives a bit on the edge of the law and who is, you know, ruthless and determined and things like that, who becomes the saviour. And it seems to me that that really plays into the kind of American dream. So that there's this real idea that I think central to American life, that, you know, one person can make a difference, and the idea that, you know, anyone who tries hard enough can make a difference and can get on in America, I think is something that's certainly not exclusive to America, but I think it's more central to the American identity than it is to the identity of many other countries. And also with both, the fact that it's a child's observation of things, I think brings even more to that. So they build up these characters, these outsiders, as almost, they're almost more than human. They are, you know, almost like superheroes in terms of their ability to right wrongs and things like that. And I do feel like, again, that sense of the lone man with a gun, in American culture, is a really, really important one. You know, you see it in 80s action movies, you know, hugely. Whereas, aside from characters like James Bond, in the UK, I think that kind of story is more often told about teams. So there's lots of, if you look at like English war movies and things like that, they tend to be about groups of people working together to overcome problems and, you know, that kind of thing, as opposed to loners, as opposed to, you know, to solo people doing things alone. And obviously in True Grit you have got the beef as well. But those two characters are, Cogburn and LaBeef are kind of rivals all the way through, and it feels a bit like a buddy movie in a sense that they're constantly rubbing each other up the wrong way and trying to outdo each other. So they're kind of in competition with each other to get the bad guy rather than working as a team. Although, you know, towards the end they do team up a bit more. So yeah, that was the thing I really took away from both of the books, that they really seem to be good representations to me of what American culture and what American thrillers are often about. Is this, they're real, you know, both of them are true American heroes. And certainly Rooster Cogburn, you know, in the movie, famously played by John Wayne, who, you know, really epitomises that kind of slightly grizzled, often older. So it's interesting, Shane is a young guy, but Rooster Cogburn is definitely, you know, kind of middle-aged guy. And again, you know, there's similarities with characters like Dirty Harry, who again is this slightly older, you know, worn down by life kind of a character, which seems really common in American popular culture. So yeah, that's my slightly rambly thoughts on both Shane and True Grit. Do let me know if you read them and if you agree with my comments. But as I said at the start, I'm really, really enjoying June on the Range, really getting into reading Westerns again. I've got a few more I'm going to try and finish before the month is out. So if you're taking part as well, do let me know what you're reading. And as always, hope you're safe and well. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.